the most horrific murder in British history. 3 slow hours of agony, slow death, his own guts rupturing before his eyes. That was what Brian Waters endured on June 19, 2003, in a final, unspeakable ritual of torture. It all started not in the dark recesses of the criminal world, but with £20,000 in missing cash and a secret cannabis farm. The initial spiral of depravity began with a cruel financial leverage held by John Wilson, a notoriously violent Manchester mobster, over Brian Waters, a 44-year-old cannabis dealer. Brian was already severely indebted to Wilson after failing to protect £20,000 in Wilson's cash that was seized by police in 1999, and he was plunged thousands of pounds further into unrecoverable debt when he was robbed in late 2002. Furious, Wilson utilized the intelligence and surveillance expertise of his associate, Christopher Guestmore Jr., a man who had been a privileged youth and a master of infiltration for television outlets like the BBC, to track Brian's son, Gavin, back to the secret, £3,000-a-month grow operation at Burnt House Farm near Cheshire. This discovery of Brian's concealed cannabis farm enraged Wilson, who saw it as a profound betrayal of trust while Brian still owed him a fortune. Wilson ordered a brutal, definitive punishment, commanding a gang, Christopher, Wilson's violent right-hand man Otis Matthews, and the intimidating Jim Raven, the milkman, who wore menacing tattoos that read, "Maniac," and "Proceed with caution," along with lookout David Moran, to execute the attack. The 3 core attackers, Christopher, Raven, and Matthews, first ransacked the farm and stole all the cannabis plants and equipment, before returning to the farmhouse to wait. The horror commenced when Solomon Razak, arriving to tend the plants, walked into the ambush completely unsuspecting. He was instantly subjected to a relentless, violent barrage of punches and kicks to his face and body as the men started demanding money, information Razak truthfully did not possess. The men then tied him up with heavy rope and suspended him upside down from a beam. This position was quickly followed by water torture. Razak was plunged headfirst into a large barrel filled with foul, dirty water to simulate drowning. When answers were not forthcoming, the methods escalated into deliberate, systematic cruelty. Razak was electrocuted and then had acid poured directly onto his exposed body. The brutality continued for well over an hour. A pillowcase was thrown over his head and set on fire, the flames burning his shoulders and neck before being extinguished. Finally, an industrial staple gun was used as a weapon, firing multiple, agonizing metal staples deep into his head and back. Miraculously, he remained alive. Brian Waters then walked into the horrific scene. He was instantly subdued and attacked, suffering the same initial savage beating as Razak, before he was also tied up and subjected to the same water torture, lowered headfirst into the dirty water barrel. The tormentors then introduced the object that sealed his agonizing fate, an iron bar. One of the men inserted the bar into Brian's anus and pushed it with such immense, sickening force that it physically ruptured his internal organs, causing catastrophic damage and internal bleeding while Razak watched in horror. The cruelty intensified with the arrival of Brian's children, Gavin, 25, and Natalie, 20. They were apprehended and dragged into the room to witness their father's death. Gavin was horrifically beaten and then bound, and a noose was placed around his neck. The rope was thrown over a beam and tightened, deliberately choking him as the gang used his suffering to further pressure Brian. Natalie was also tied up and placed next to her father. One of the attackers then placed a gun directly into Natalie's mouth, using her imminent execution as the ultimate threat. She would later vividly recall them turning Brian's chair to face her, demanding, "Look at your daughter." Do you really want her to go through this? One of the attackers then ruthlessly sliced off her top with a knife, further humiliating her. To complete the murder, a bin bag was set on fire and held over Brian, allowing the hot, melting plastic to drip excruciatingly onto his exposed skin. The industrial stapler was then fired again, repeatedly, into his back and skull. After a total of 3 continuous hours of this merciless, escalating torture, Brian Waters finally succumbed to the overwhelming nature of his injuries and passed away. Natalie would later confirm she heard her father's desperate, heavy breathing cease. The gang then abducted Brian's wife, Julie, from their home, driving her back to the farm just as police, alerted by lookout David Moran, arrived. The police found a scene of absolute devastation. Brian was dead, with Natalie, Gavin, and Razak alive but suffering from severe trauma and injuries. The subsequent autopsy revealed the unimaginable extent of the violence. Brian had suffered over 100 separate injuries, including the catastrophic internal ruptures from the iron bar, multiple broken ribs, bleeding on the brain, fractures to his face, and a collapsed lung. The criminals' sloppy departure left behind crucial evidence, including wrappings from a bizarre feast they had consumed, and, critically, a plastic bag containing human feces that provided Christopher Guestmore Jr.'s definitive DNA. Further DNA from a Sprite bottle, Marlboro Light ends, and a glove confirmed his presence. While Wilson, Raven, and Matthews were convicted, Christopher fled, establishing a life of extreme luxury in Malta as Andrew Lamb. After 16 long years on the run, he was captured, extradited, and convicted in 2021, 18 years after the crime. The case remains a horrifying benchmark in British legal history, with Natalie, Gavin, Razak, and Julie permanently scarred by the unspeakable cruelty they witnessed and endured. How do you feel about Christopher Guestmore Jr. managing to live a life of luxury in Malta for 16 years while the victims and survivors were still struggling with their trauma? Given the systematic nature and 3-hour duration of the torture, do you believe the life sentences handed down were sufficient punishment? What detail from this chilling account truly shocked you the most? Share your thoughts and answers in the comments below. If this story impacted you, please share this video to keep the memory of this horrific event and the long fight for justice alive.